I'm Mike Barthel, and this is Risk Work. Today's guest is an industrial control systems security expert with 30 plus years of experience in water and wastewater utility. A professional engineer by trade, he is also very well known for his expertise in SCADA and industrial control systems. He's an established author and from time to time lends his expertise by speaking and collaborating with the critical ICS security and infrastructure forums. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm Risk Work welcome to Jake Brodsky. Yeah. Hi, Jake.
Dreams and hallucinations, everybody.
Jake, how are you this morning? How's your family doing?
We're all well. We're all doing good things. And my dog is the happiest dog on earth because he's got us all here.
Well, that's good. Sounds like a lucky dog.
He is, and he knows it too.
Well, it sounds like a great thing to have going on right now. I know our pets right now are our favorite people in the house. So, hey, so thanks again for taking time with us, Jake. I want to talk to you a little bit about security awareness, and I want to talk to you about the water industry and things like that. But first, let's talk about security awareness. And you and I have spoken before, and we kind of broke this down into three categories, philosophical, financial, and practical. Can you touch on those 3 points a little bit?
Okay, yeah. The philosophical aspect is pretty straightforward. We actually have decent standards that talk about the philosophy of risk management, and they do reasonably well. The problem with those documents is obviously it's only the philosophical part. It doesn't tell you what you really need to do. So it's kind of like telling a pilot, you need a checklist. Okay, great, we have checklists. Let's do the checklist thing. By the way, what goes on the checklists? Well, that gets philosophical. And then we go around in circles. And most of the reason why we're going around in circles is because people don't really think about exactly what a checklist should have. That gets back to, people will say, okay, let's go take a look at the financial side of this. Well, what are we doing? Well, we're mitigating risk. Well, that sounds really abstract. Can we put a number on it? No, we're mitigating risk. And that then goes around in circles and people say, well, how much would it cost you to insure this? And this is what you would save. And then we think, well, okay, but the insurance companies don't really know what's going on either. So we have that problem. So this whole morass turns into a castle in the sky. And I've been using that term a lot lately because it really describes a lot of what's wrong with the industrial control system security features. There's a lot of people saying some very valid things, but it doesn't meet reality yet.
How do we get people interested in security, Jake?
By accident. That's what happened to me. I don't know. The truth is we're picking up a lot of people I like to call refugees from IT.
Right.
They're getting tired of the office IT work because it can be pretty hard to deal with at times. And they think that they might be getting into something better by going into an industrial side of things. Well, there are some aspects on the industrial side that are more pleasant than the office IT side. The politics tends to be a little bit less. But they still have very strong demands on your time, and they also demand that you be very upfront about what you're doing, who you're doing it with, and what you expect the outcome to be, and when you expect it to happen. They are on a schedule. They need this to work. They can't fool around, and every time that you screw up, there's money falling on the floor. So they have a lot of things that they have to worry about. So the refugees that come from IT, and that's where the biggest influx of people's coming from right now, those guys have a huge learning curve. It's long and it's flat for a long time until they get used to the idea that, yeah, if you wear a hard hat and you know the safety stuff and you know the people who are working, you too can be a member of the tribe called the plant. Then you can be somebody effective. But until you get to that point, oh boy, you're overhead, buddy.
Right. Well, one of the things that's very impressive about your background, and speaking of ICS security awareness, a few years back, you co-created a project called Project Shine. Can you tell us a little bit about this project and what was learned?
Okay. The early days of Project Shine Nobody knew how bad the exposure was of industrial control systems to the internet. Bob Radvanovsky and I were drinking beers and talking to each other over the phone and got to thinking, well, we didn't really want to touch these things directly because the laws at the time were pretty fuzzy. This was back around the 2008, 2009 timeframe. And we thought, we'd rather not touch these things, but there is something out there that does, that's legitimate, that everybody can understand, and that's a search engine spider. And if you let the search engine spiders go out there, you'll find all kinds of interesting things going on. And in fact, people were finding industrial control systems by accident, by simple Google searches. So we thought at first, let's hit a few interesting keywords on Google. And that's about the time frame when we discovered Shodan, and we went, oh, that's even better. Let's go for that. And then I started creating a bunch of queries for things like serial port servers. Who else uses serial port servers? Almost nobody. So we went looking for specific ones, and then we started looking around for other bits and pieces of industrial control systems, certain firewalls that were commonly used. We went looking for PLC web pages, things of those little bits of pieces of evidence that indicate that it might be something useful. And we developed a list of keywords, and then we started scraping the Shodan engine because it didn't really have at the time most of the industrial protocols. We started scraping the engine, and we thought, okay, at some point we're going to reach a knee of the aggregation of all this data, and we'll know how many are out there roughly. Well, we never got to the knee. The curve was supposed to bend over, and it didn't. It kept going. And after about 1.5 million hits, we started getting really, really nervous. And we started realizing that our database was getting kind of scary, sort of like refining uranium. And we didn't really want to have that stuff left around. So we actually stopped the exercise because we realized that either we were counting things wrong, or the problem was getting a lot worse and we didn't know what to do about it. And it could have been a bit of both. But we stopped it at that point, and then we wrote a report about what we had found. And after we wrote that report, even while we were making quiet reports here and there on the SCADASEC list, people started looking for this stuff just like we were. And pretty soon they were being a lot more direct about it. And Shodan started including a lot of industrial protocols. And that made our work kind of ready to summarize. So we did. And that's what we summarized. And we said, okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're trashing this database. It's dangerous. And we did. We didn't keep the data anymore because we're scared of it. We flat out don't want that information around. We didn't collect it by any unusual means or anything. We just didn't want to have to be responsible for keeping something like that.
How aware do you think some of these corporations are to these type of findings?
They know it's out there, but the problem that we have with them knowing it there and figuring out where it's coming from are two different things. A lot of times contractors will leave devices behind so that they can service them remotely. Like, for example, after a big construction project, a contractor might leave behind a modem or or perhaps a 4G device buried inside a variable frequency drive. And you don't know it's there. You don't have it on your books. You can't find it in the scan, and yet it's there. And the problem that we have is that we're finding those things on the internet, and we have no idea where they are, but we know that there is one. And we know it because we're seeing the web pages, which most people don't bother to turn off. So do the companies know it? Yeah, they know that it's a problem, but they don't know how to go looking for it. And that's a big problem.
Well, one of the problems we've seemed to have gotten ourselves into as a society is, we've automated everything to save money and to improve awareness in most cases, and we want to make things safer. But what are some of the challenges with security implementation when it comes to automation?
Well, a lot of the automation that we put in the field, I'd like to say nice things about how effective it is. It isn't really tuned for this, but let's put that issue aside. The tuning can change. That's something that people know how to do. The biggest headache that we have is that this takes people, and it increases the response time to when things go sideways. When you have a problem in the middle of the night, or worst of all, 2 o'clock in the morning, which is just after you've gone to sleep, and then you wake up again and you're doggone near worthless. I know I've been there. The problem is you get out there and you realize I need the security expert to help me get around some of these problems. I need the instrumentation guy to go look at it, and I need an electrician to help the instrumentation guy, because there's some voltages in here which I really don't think anybody's comfortable working with. And by the time you've done that, you've now increased the number of people that have to respond to an event pretty significantly. And that's a problem, because now your costs have gone up. And the whole reason for putting the automation in there was to control the costs. Because if it really gets that expensive, guess what we're going to do? We're going to remove the automation, and we're going to go back to the old ways of doing things, because, hey, you know what? Those people at least knew how to get things back up and working again. You only had one guy to do it instead of 5 or 6. So where's the return on the investment when you involve the security people? This is the thing that most of the security people that I see just flat out deny. They don't even understand that this is a problem. They think, well, we're saving money because you're not going to be getting into these big problems. Well, we wouldn't be getting into these big problems if we didn't automate all this stuff and then want to put it out on the internet. So maybe the question is, can we be effective, and can we not have to put in anything big and complicated that requires a big crew of people to work on in the middle of the night? That's the problem. We're making things more expensive than they should be.
Let's transition that thought into water security. And you are one of the, I would say, of the people I've ever met, you're one of the biggest water experts that I think there probably is out there. And I just want to ask you, how much damage could an adversary do from a control system?
The damage is not readily apparent. It's not obvious. You have to know something about the process in order to be able to do something ugly. But here's a hint. The filters in a water filtration plant, be they in the wastewater side or the water side, are not exactly robust. They are delicate. The backwash sequence that's in them is difficult to do correctly, and if you get it wrong, you can wash the filter media out of the filter and into the rest of the plant, which means you no longer have a filter that really works. This is something that long-term damage. So if you got into one of these things and, say, changed some timers or changed some flow rates, you could actually cause a fair amount of grief. And the problem that we have is that most water treatment plants don't guard those types of settings because people don't think about the damage that you can do. Another place that has been done, I've personally seen it, is where, well, you've got water pumping stations, and those water pumping stations have excess capacity. The reason they have that excess capacity is because you don't always have all of your pumps available to you. Some of them may be down for maintenance. One of them may be as a backup in case the first one trips offline. So you typically have about 2 to 3 times more pumping capacity than you might actually need. And the other reason that you have it is just in case you break a pipeline, those pumps are going to be necessary to keep the pressure up so that everybody else doesn't get contamination flowing backwards into the water pipeline. It's counterintuitive, but when they actually have a break, they pump more water into the break to blow the contaminants outward, and that way keep the system sanitary. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why they have extra pumps in the system. And the problem that can happen is, what if you turn them all on at once? Well, it's possible. There usually isn't anything blocking it, which there should be, but there isn't. And then you have a problem where you can actually break a pipeline. And I know of a guy that did that. And when one very bad afternoon, he managed to blow away about I don't know, $4 million in today's money. It was pretty ugly. Needless to say, he wasn't fired because he was working by himself, and he just had a headspace day. It was really bad. So those are examples of things that can go wrong in water. And by the way, these are not cheap fixes. These are the kinds of things, sort of like burning up a very large high voltage transformer. Those are not exactly off-the-shelf items. So yeah, those are problems that people can have, and they're very difficult to deal with.
We talk about interdependent critical infrastructure, Jake. Let's say, for example, the power goes off, the electric goes off for a few days. How does that affect water?
Badly, very badly. Look, there is an advantage in water. We can store the product. We can store it uphill so that all it has to do is flow downhill. That's great. So we don't have to have the pumps ready to run at every single second of the day. We can take them down for a few hours and work on them. But at the end of that, we do have to get something up and running. And this is one of the problems, is that if we have an extended power outage, we're going to be very, very nervous. And we don't actually connect directly into the high voltage transmission stations. We typically have substations that feed from a large transmission station, and sometimes both feeders will go down. And I can remember one afternoon we had the control room engineer pacing back and forth across the floor, practically wearing a trail into the carpet, worried about when we were going to get power back. And it was a pretty serious problem, because we were literally within minutes of starting to have to we were going to run out of water in some of the tanks, and people were going to go dry. That's a very bad thing for a water utility. You don't want to ever have that happen.
Talk about that a little, Jake. Jake, sorry to interrupt you. Talk about what would happen.
Well, the first thing that you dig into is what we call the fire reserve. That's for fighting household fires. And that's something you really don't want to get into, because obviously if the fire company then calls you and says, "Where's our water?" and we say, they're not going to be very happy with us. And we're not going to be very happy with them, because they'll be draining all the water that's left in the system. That's going to be bad for a lot of people. You can tolerate a power outage for a few hours and not much will happen. But if you have a water outage, it's going to be a while before you get that water back into the system. And once that happens, I mean, you're going to have to also start making sure you have a lot more of it coming, so you can re-sanitize the pipes. You're going to have people running their faucets continuously. It's going to get ugly fast. And we're never more than about 6 to 12 hours from dysentery. And that's something that nobody wants to talk about, but it's pretty damn serious. You know, we talk about a pandemic today. One of the few things that's keeping us healthy is a straight water supply. And if you don't have that, things get bad really, really fast. And this is something that we will have a very hard time dealing with, because then you'll stress all the infrastructure for transportation, getting people out of the region. Because basically water is what makes the cities possible. You know, you can live without air conditioning for a few hours, you can live without heat for a few hours, but once you're without water for more than 2 or 3 hours, you're going to be looking for something, and then you're going to have to go somewhere to get it. And that really gets bad fast. It's not something you want to deal with.
One of the things you and I talked about in the past was the topic of load, the demand in the electrical side of things, and what can happen with that to, I guess, set the wheel in motion. Electric goes off, water goes off. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, we try to make the very best we can of the load. Here's the problem. Water utilities have to pump water uphill, and it's not cheap to do. Think of it as hydroelectric power backwards. And you have some sense of scale as to what a water utility will spend to get water to you. It's not cheap. That is a major expense. It runs in the large utility where I retired from, their water utility bill typically runs into the millions every month. And it's so big that they buy it off the spot market with futures contracts. So this is a very significant load. And by the way, what else does the load do? It also can make a major mess of the grid. All you have to do is switch it around enough times in enough unexpected places. And again, somebody's going to have a very bad day.
Hey, Jake, we talked about risk and resiliency versus vulnerability and responses. What do you feel is more practical and why?
Risk is the resiliency part is what I like to focus on. And we typically talk about risks because risks are statistical. And risks are Resiliency, on the other hand, is having a bunch of different types of ways to make things work. It's not necessarily statistical. It's more like if this breaks, we'll have this other means of getting water to you, or electricity to you, or gas, or get the transportation to you. So, we talk about risk. Risk is an abstract number. It's a statistic. Resiliency is what we should really be aiming for. That way, we know that if A breaks, B is there to help us. I know that's pretty abstract, but I don't know what else to say.
Sure. No. And to kind of bring it back to, the electric grid has a set of bylaws, the NERC CIP bylaws. We talked about how maybe it was your opinion that maybe it should talk about load more with the NERC CIP bylaws, or there was something you talked about, like how we could improve that. And I know I've had other people in the past say that they were concerned that NERC CIP was kind of more of a compliance-driven thing, and it didn't include security like fast enough from the beginning, or something of that nature.
I think the NERC CIP does some interesting things that are worthy of mention. It does get the security products out into the field. And the hope was that if we put them in the field, something magical will happen and someone will understand how to make the best use of them. In many cases, in earlier versions of the NERC CIP, they would say, put a firewall out there. Okay, the auditor comes along, sees the firewall, doesn't know how to read firewall rules, doesn't know if those rules are appropriate or adequate in any way, and they just check the box and move on. The problem is that with the NERC CIP, they were trying to be compliance-oriented by telling people, you do this, 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 and this for a system of this size, and then below that size, don't worry about it. Many people may remember the notorious memo from Mike Asante, when may he rest in peace. He wrote a memo to a lot of the electric utilities in NERC, telling them that if they remove black start from their generation plant, just so they didn't have to deal with the NERC CIP guidelines for security, that they were basically cutting off their noses to spite their faces. And it was a very accurate assessment. A lot of places were removing the ability to start from nothing. Most people don't realize you can't start a power plant just by flipping a switch. You have to, it actually takes power to start it. It's kind of like needing a battery to start a car. Well, they need that power from the grid in order to move things forward. And that was an issue. Well, now we talk about NERC CIP. They managed to get that silliness out of the way, thank goodness. But this is the problem with prescriptive approaches, is that it doesn't have a philosophy behind it. The problem with a philosophy is that it doesn't tell you how to do anything. It just gives you philosophy. So these are two flip sides of the same coin. You need both. And the problem is there isn't a lot of coordination between NERC CIP and the more philosophical standards, such as ISA 99. And then it gets worse. There's a little bit of a thought process. The power companies are covering the things that they can cover, which is namely the generation side of the grid. They're trying to protect the generation side. What they don't look at is the load side. We're doing a lot of management of load, but we don't really connect that in with the cybersecurity requirements. And unfortunately, the load is just as important as the generation, because if you suddenly remove a lot of load, what happens? Well, you've got a lot of excess generation capacity. So you end up shutting things down, whether you really want to or not. You shut that stuff down, and then you bring the load back, and then the grid crashes. So you have to pay attention to the load side as well. Now, the NERC CIP, that's beyond the scope of NERC CIP. It's beyond the scope of a lot of things, but we still have to look at it, and we're not doing that.
Thank you for that explanation on that. One of the things I want to bring you back to, Jake, was we talked about earlier in the program, the learning curve from IT to like OT and ICS security. Can you explain to our viewers? I don't think people really understand, and I know this is something that I'm still learning as well, Jake, but can you talk about the differences between an IT cybersecurity person and an OT or an ICS cybersecurity person, and what the difference is?
Well, we've spent a lot of time trying to put this into nice little pithy sayings. It's not C, I, and A. It's A, I, and C. That's great for a very, very beginner's type of security. The C being confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Everybody says that because, in the office environment, confidentiality comes first. In the industrial control system, it's backwards. It's availability comes first, and then integrity, and then confidentiality if you actually care about it, because in many cases you don't. The data is going to be public anyways. Who cares? So the issue that we have with industrial control systems is making sure the availability is there and making sure that the primary mission of the control system is still there. And this is what trips up a lot of brand new people in there, is they don't realize we're talking about safety, reliability, and performance, S, R, and P. Safety is always first. The control system sometimes has to do things to keep everybody safe. So for an example, you've got an example of something I was working on some time ago, the burner control systems for a very large boiler. Okay, if you leave those burners on and you starve the thing for water, you're going to have something go boom, and it won't stay in the plant fence. So you really have to protect those burner controls. You need them because if something goes badly, you need to shut the boiler down. So the burner control system is a safety system. You need to explain to people, this isn't, there are no do-overs here. This damn well better work. Because if it doesn't, it's going to kill people. And this is what blows the minds of a lot of people who are used to the office. They're used to the idea of, oh, just make a backup and then restore the backup and everything will be okay. No, it won't be. You're not going to tell that to some poor guy who just lost his hand. You're not going to tell that to somebody who's in the field expecting you to be watching their back, and instead you're just going to throw stuff at the wall and see what works. You can throw stuff at the wall when you're in the office because you've got backups, but there are no backups for the stuff that you might destroy in an industrial control system. So you really, really need to be on your A game. You need to be thinking about what's plan B. How am I going to know if this isn't working as soon as possible? And this is something that they're not used to. And it also involves a lot of physics, a lot of chemistry, and maybe even some biology. These are things that people in the office environment just aren't aware of. They're just not aware of the scale of how big this is. And they're not aware of what the dependencies are either. So you say, well, it's just power, let's shut it down. There's other backups. There may not be. It might be a hot summer day and they need all the capacity they can get. And if you shut that thing down, there's going to be rolling brownouts. That's not funny. A lot of things shut down when that happens. So you have to think in terms of a very large, complicated system that involves technologies that are not obvious to people that are used to walking around in an office all day. So I like to explain it in terms of having time under a hard hat, getting to know the tribe, the provincial type of behavior that goes on inside a plant, getting to know who does what and where they are and what they're up to. There's a thing in a plant, you watch my back and I'll watch yours type of thing. You might not like those people very much, but that's a cultural thing that goes on in plants. You watch each other's backs because that's all you've got. And that is something that we're just not used to in an office. There's no safety problem in an office, but there is on the job, and you really need that. I know that's kind of long-winded, but that just gives you a flavor of some of the differences between these types of systems.
No, that's some great information. And another headache that we're seeing is increased activity from nation states that are involved in our, energy systems and things like that. What can we do to mitigate that?
I hate to say it. There's too many. This is going to make people smile. I've been using this a while. We call it corporate level pornography. These involve carefully airbrushed ideas that bear no resemblance to actual reality anywhere, but my God, they look good. And this belief is that somehow, through remote access, you'll get some expert in some other part of the country or the continent that will be able to help you and do magical things for you. It's the idea that somebody outside the plant has all your answers. That's not real. And that remote access is a major sticking point because a lot of people use it. And they believe in their heart of hearts that they need it because they read a glossy magazine that said that they should. Put down the glossy magazines and let's get back to reality. The people that work on these systems are trying to get a job done, and the last thing they need is a lot of gooey ideas going on board. You often see situations where people are on plants and they'll see people walking in suits, and that's a big red flag. Oh my God, get things cleaned up, get things kind of safe because they might want to walk out here, and I need to keep them safe, type of thing. And it's a big hassle for them, and they don't like it. So now when you talk about nation states, you bring nation states into this picture. How do you protect yourself? Well, the first thing you do is remove all the remote access you can possibly find. I'm sorry, you don't need it. These plants used to work for decades before they had remote access. You can manage without remote access. It might cost you an employee or two, but it would cost you those employees anyways, just keeping the remote access system safe. So you're not really losing anything here. Keeping nation states at bay also involves doing a lot of things that make the control system harder to use. You can make a perfectly safe control system, and you know what'll happen? You won't be able to turn the damn thing on. There's a famous saying by Admiral Grace Hopper, a ship at harbor is safe, but that's not what ships are for. You have to get down to a certain point, and you have to be able to realize that at some point you're going to have a nation state playing dirty tricks on you. And you just have to have plans for when that happens. We need to design systems that catch this as early as possible without making it too difficult to use. And that's a huge challenge, and I don't know of anybody that's doing that well.
Our guest today is Jake Brodsky, an industrial control system security expert with 30 plus years of experience in water and wastewater utility. A PE by trade, he's also very well known for his expertise in SCADA and industrial control systems. Jake, thanks so much for taking the time with us today, and we'd love to have you on for an additional show with a panel interview if that's something of interest to you.
I certainly would be, yes.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much. This was Risk Work News, and we'll see you next time.